Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm your host tonight, George Kane. With me tonight is August Berkshire, the president of Minnesota Atheists. We're going to be discussing a pamphlet that August wrote, which is Atheism 101. And before we get into that, August, I want to talk about your experiences as a public speaker for Minnesota Atheists. Now, what sort of audiences have you addressed?
Okay, well, I get invited to a lot of schools, both universities and high schools. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that I would go and try and get all this lot of information out, and there'd be hardly any time for questions. So as the years went by, I thought I'll preload it. I'll put a lot of this stuff into pamphlets, and right now I've got a number of pamphlets, and I'll give them to the teacher before I even get there to hand out to the class to sort of read, to bring them up to speed a little bit. And then the talk, when I get there, can be shorter, and then there's more time for questions. So that was kind of the impetus for me to write these pamphlets in the first place.
Okay, so that's the audience that
students
addressed to. Okay, and I'll point out to the viewing audience that you can download not only this pamphlet, but many of your other pamphlets at augustberkshire, all one word, .com.
Yes.
Right.
I should also mention that these essays are at my website as essays, but also as pre-formatted pamphlets. So you could download it just like this and print them out and fold them up yourself, either way.
Okay. And also we should mention that if anyone in our viewing audience is a teacher or has some organization and would like to have an atheist as a public speaker, that you can contact us at the website for Minnesota Atheists that appears on your screen frequently during the program, www.minnesotaatheists.org, and request a speaker, and we'll be glad to provide one. It could be you, could be you, could be me,
could be a number of
people. Okay, so let's discuss this pamphlet, August. You begin with some definitions: agnostic, atheist, apatheist. Do you want to explain those?
Yeah, I mean, that's a confusion that a lot of people have, is what is an atheist, how is it different from an agnostic? Mm-hmm. I always like to start with the word agnostic. Agnosticism has to do with knowledge, meaning agnostic is someone who is without knowledge of a God.
Or esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would say that everyone is without knowledge of a God. If you're going to believe, it's going to be on faith. So in that way of thinking, everyone is an agnostic. We don't know whether at least invisible, undetectable gods exist. How can you know that? So then the question is, are you going to believe or you're not going to believe? And I think to believe you have to make a leap of faith, because there is no evidence. So if you make a leap of faith and believe, then you're a theist. If you lack a belief, then you're an atheist. You're without belief. Now there's another category, some people who haven't even really thought much about the question or don't care about the question, and it's called apatheism, combination of apathy and theism. Mm-hmm. That describes a lot of young people. They're just so busy with their jobs or their schools, boyfriend, girlfriend. They just don't see any practical application for gods and religions. So they haven't really reached a conclusion. They just don't care. Yeah.
Now most self-professed atheists have encountered, especially among Christians, the view that atheism and agnosticism are somehow in contradiction. And if you tell them you're an atheist, they try to prove to you that, no, you're not an atheist, you just haven't thought it through enough, and that really you're an agnostic. But as you're pointing out, they really are not in conflict.
Not at all. Like I say, everyone is an agnostic. Nobody knows. And then are you going to make the leap of faith or are you not? And atheists are conservative. We don't make a leap of faith. We follow the evidence as far as it goes and no farther.
Yeah, and so that practically every atheist is also an agnostic.
Yeah.
Right. What about some other terms that you don't address here? I found that a lot of atheists don't like using the term atheist, but have some other self-appellation that they prefer for one reason or another, like skeptic or naturalist or freethinker.
Yeah, there are all these other euphemisms, humanist, rationalist,
right.
freethinker, secularist, secular humanist, skeptic. And I'm all of those too. But I like to use the word atheist for two reasons. First of all, any other label you use, a religious person could use too. They could say, oh, I'm a humanist. I'm a free thinker. I think freely about religion. I'm not bound to any dogma. I'm a skeptic toward many things. My belief is rational, but one thing a religious person will never do is say they're an atheist. So it's a very clear word. The second reason I like to use the word is because I've already called myself the worst thing that they can think to call me. And I've just done it in a friendly, relaxed way. And it kind of leaves them in a quandary. You know, they thought they were going to corner me or something, but no, I'm proud to be an atheist.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the next section you have in your pamphlet is burden of proof. What do you say in this part?
Yeah. Well, religious people never say, oh, there may be a God. They always say there is a God. They make that positive assertion, a God exists. And so then the burden of proof is on them to prove it. Okay, prove there's a God. Now, there are two kinds of atheists. One kind would say, gods don't exist. And
That's a strong atheist.
That's a strong atheist. And I think you can say certain gods don't exist. Gods that you can examine and disprove. Okay, we can say Apollo. We can say Apollo doesn't exist. But if a God is invisible, undetectable, outside of time and space, you can't examine that claim. There's no reason to believe in such a God. So we lack a belief towards such a God. And our argument is that there's no evidence or compelling reason to believe. And so our burden is to show that there is no evidence or compelling reason, which means that if someone comes up to us with an argument, our burden is to show that that's not a good argument for belief. And if we can do that, we've met our burden.
Yeah. Now, I've met people who've asserted that, well, this is just wordplay to try to shirk your burden of proof, that everybody, the great majority of people believe in God, and therefore atheists who claim there is no God have a burden of proof. But what I'd say is that we're not trying to shirk a burden of proof, but that everyone has a responsibility to demonstrate what it is that he claims.
Right. And our claim actually isn't that there is no God. There could be a God in another galaxy, and if we lived in that galaxy, it would be perfectly obvious to us that that God exists. But from here, we're not detecting it.
Yeah.
Or if there's one in this galaxy, we're not detecting it. So that's our claim, is that there's no evidence and no compelling reason, and that's a burden we can meet.
Right. And the discussion about evidence is very important too, because proof is a very dangerous word.
Yeah.
Proof sounds like mathematics, when we can prove with complete certainty. And we're not after that. Well, all that we can use is empirical evidence, the existence of the senses. It's always possible that whatever conclusion one reaches, either an atheist or a theist, could be wrong, but we have to look at where the preponderance of the evidence lies. All right, moving on in your pamphlet, you then discuss worldviews.
Yeah. I noticed that when I was coming out of my religious background, and I think this is true of a lot of religious people, is that they realized that religion is mainly an accident of birth and geography. And just because their parents told them this or that was true doesn't mean it's true. They're handed this set of top-down beliefs. The religious worldview, the theistic worldview, is top-down, that first there's something supernatural, and then there's something natural. Now, it's usually a supernatural God who then creates a supernatural heaven and other supernatural beings, angels, and then out of nothing creates the natural world. And the supernatural precedes and supersedes the natural world, monitors every molecule, supposedly, this God is doing this. And the atheist says, you know, these religious ideas have just been handed to me by my parents, by my society. They're an assumption, and I'm not going to assume anything. And I'm going to reverse the tables. Instead of looking at the world top down, I'm going to look at it bottom up and not make any assumptions about existence. So I'll look around, I'll use my senses, I'll use my reason, I'll follow the chain of evidence as far as it goes. And when we do that, we find that there is no evidence that leads us into anything supernatural. Maybe it's there, but we have no way of detecting it, no way of knowing it's there. So we stop where the evidence runs out, and it's a bottom-up view of the world.
And it's a worldview that's compatible with science, with the methodology of science.
Yes.
And one point, too, there are very practical outcomes of the different worldviews, of having an atheistic worldview as opposed to having a Christian worldview, for example. And that a Christian worldview, accepting as a starting point the Bible or Christian dogma, is going to believe things that may have made sense when it was first explained, before there was much knowledge of science, when knowledge of sociology and so on was much more primitive. But, and so it ossifies as fact really nothing more than ancient prejudices.
And that's the problem with almost all religions, is they can't change. Now, sometimes they change in interesting ways. They reinterpret what's there, or say that something that's there means something suddenly something new, or they might get a new revelation, such as when Mormons wanted Utah to join the states. They got a new revelation that polygamy was no longer a good thing, because they needed to get rid of that to join the states. So sometimes they can sort of amend their religion a little bit, but science has within it, built in, a correcting mechanism. And if you can overturn something in science, you might win a Nobel Prize. So we do reward. We're often skeptical of new things at first, but if the evidence is there on your side and you persist, science will reward that.
Yeah, and that's an important point, in that the conclusions of science are, by their very nature, things that can be proven to be correct or false. And the one thing that, above all else, is going to be essential to the reputation of any aspiring scientist is being right, and not to dogmatically defend something that proves to be an error. And so that self-correcting mechanism is also a motivation in science, that scientists don't want to be dogmatically defending things that get proven wrong. Yeah. Let's move on to the next section of your pamphlet, which is leaps of faith. You have 10 of these. First off, explain to us what a leap of faith is.
Well, to believe in anything supernatural, you need to make a leap of faith. And some people think that believing in God is just a single leap. But I thought about it for a while. I thought, no, there are so many parts to what most people think a God is, a typical God. And they're all independent. You could take them. So just to read quickly, the first leap is that something supernatural even exists. Second, that supernatural thing is a being, that this being has consciousness, that this being is eternal, has always existed. This being can create something out of nothing, that this being monitors the entire universe, that this being changes things through miracles, that the being is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving. You could just be a few of those things or one of those things. So these are each one a separate leap of faith. And I like to say, when someone says to me, well, if I prayed to Jesus and some miracle happened right before your eyes, would you buy my whole theology? They don't say it that way, but that's what they mean. I said, no, because even if you pray to Jesus, it might not actually be a Jesus that's answering. How do we know? But if I saw something that was truly miraculous, it would at least make the first break that something supernatural can happen. See, I don't even think something supernatural can happen. Right. So just to make that barrier break would be a big revelation to me. Yeah,
that's an interesting point, and I know there are atheists who disagree over the question of whether there could be a proof of a supernatural God, a demonstration of a supernatural God. The argument being that if there were something, as you're talking about, that demonstrated an action of a supernatural God, it would just become part then of the natural world that science would then study as a phenomenon existing in the world. Now, it seems to me, though, that I'm on the opposite side of that. That's a position, for example, taken by P.Z. Myers. But it seems to me that the atheist position is refutable if indeed there is a God.
Yes.
If there's a God who wants to prove that he exists and prove that he's supernatural, can violate the rules of science and nature, he should be able to do so.
Yeah, the atheist position is falsifiable, and that's something I like to point out to theists, is there are things that would change our mind. Is there anything that would change your mind as a religious person? And I just kind of leave that question hanging there.
It's a very telling argument.
Yeah.
All right, now then you have 6 questions, which what these questions are questions for theists that they cannot answer with empirical evidence, empirical answers. Want to walk through those?
The first question is, what are gods composed of? We know what gods aren't. Okay, it's not matter and energy as we know it, but we don't know what gods are. You might say spirit, but what is spirit? So we don't know what a god is, what a god is composed of. Second, what are the attributes of gods? Do gods exist eternally, or do they get born and they die? Think of the thousands of gods that humans have believed in over the years, the ancient Greek gods, the ancient Roman gods. Being born and dying was part of being a god. What about attitudes toward humans? Are they all loving? Are they evil? Are they temperamental? Are they indifferent towards humans? So the attributes of gods, are they all powerful? Or do they just have limited powers? Where are they located? Everywhere? Or do you have the forest god, the mountain god, etc.? Third, how do gods do things? What mechanisms do gods use to accomplish things? If you believe a God created the universe out of nothing, okay, how? How did God do it? For any miracle that you believe has a supernatural source, how? What is the mechanism? You can win almost any religious argument by those 2 questions. What is a God, and how did your God do it? Because those can't be answered. Fourth, how many gods are there? Fifth, where are these gods located? And sixth, what difference does it make? If the gods that people believed in were to suddenly disappear, what would change about the natural world? I mean, the sun stopped shining, the rain stopped falling, the flowers stopped blooming. So these are some questions I have just about the nature of gods.
August, you and I were both reared Catholics, right? And we both attended catechism.
Yeah.
And if we were to grab any kid in attending catechism, he'd feel very confident that he can answer all of these. That's what catechism does, is give him answers to questions.
Well, I never found out what a god was, though. They always say spirit.
Oh, well.
But what is spirit?
But God is not only not material, but he's all present, all seeing, all knowing.
But what is he composed of?
What material?
What substance? What is spirit? And then we're always told about the miracles that gods do, but how do they do them? So
yes,
we're never told the mechanism. It's always magic.
Right. Well, but that's essential to the theistic worldview, that they believe in magic. Now, they have answers that make sense to them, but they're answers that don't make sense materially. Now, one thing that I'd like to point out, too, we were discussing this before the program, is that Catholics have a lot of theology that gets written all the time. It's a building body of knowledge, they would say. But how do you know that it's right? They would always say, well, it's consistent with what Catholic theologians have written before. Well, how do you know if that's right? It's consistent with what Catholic theologians wrote before that. And it goes back all the way. Well, eventually you reach the earliest Catholic writers, the earliest church writers, and ask, how do you know that that's right? And if that falls, it's a whole house of cards, that the whole body of knowledge falls.
Well, this is the point fundamentalists try to make, is that's why they want a literal interpretation of the Bible, because once you say something is allegorical or symbolic, where does it end?
Okay, do you want to walk us through this next section, which are 7 problems, and these are problems with the God concept, I assume?
Yeah, the God concept that most people have. One is the problem of scale. If humans are the ultimate creation of a universe, why did this God wait at least 12 billion years before we showed up? And if humans are the ultimate creation, you need one star and one planet. You don't need billions of galaxies. So the scale is way out of proportion to the end result in time that elapsed before we showed up, and the size of the universe is a huge overkill. So that's a problem of scale. Second is a problem of silence. If a God is all-powerful and wants us to know he exists so that perhaps we could worship him, why doesn't he convincingly reveal himself? So he's all-powerful. He could do this. He could do it in a way that could convince you and I, the hardest skeptics that there are. Mm-hmm. If he's all-powerful, he could do it. He doesn't do it. It's a problem of silence. Third problem of revelation. If there's a God who has a message he wants us to clearly understand, why are his revelations so confusing? Why do we have so many different religions and holy books? Fourth, the problem of evil. If God's all-powerful and all-loving, why does evil exist, especially natural evils? And we can do a whole show on the problem of evil. Fifth, the problem of unintelligent design. If God is all-powerful, all-wise, all-good, all-knowing, why are some things poorly designed?
Such as?
Such as breathing and swallowing in a human, where they intersect here and we can choke to death. It would be quite easy, if we're being designed from scratch by a God could quite easily have done it otherwise. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of poor designs. There's a good website called Some More of God's Greatest Mistakes that people could look up. 6 is the problem of free will. If a God knows the future, that means we have no free will. Yet we're supposed to have free will, according to most theologies, to make free choices, and then we're going to get judged on these choices, maybe get sent to heaven or hell. So we need free will, but if God knows the future, then there is no free will.
Well, there are some things that are commented about, theologians about that. A local theologian, for example, Boyd, Greg Boyd, has said that God has the ability to see everything in the future, but he simply turns that off and chooses not to do so.
Yeah, well, he would have to voluntarily give it up in order for us to have free will. So at least that's consistent. No reason to believe such a God exists, but at least it gets rid of that contradiction.
Yeah. Or another argument I've heard from my Catholic upbringing is that God is like a parent. Now, if you have a child, you may know that if you tell the child, now I'm going to be leaving the room for 10 minutes, don't go into the cookie jar. It's before dinner, I don't want you to have a cookie. Mm-hmm. And you may know that as soon as you're out of the room, your child's going to go into the cookie jar.
But then how much free will does that child really have? They can't control their impulses, and that's how you know that they're going to take the cookie. They're just too young to control their impulses.
So you think the child actually has no free will?
Not in regards to cookies.
Well,
so that's the argument I would make.
That's the argument. All right.
And then the final problem is the problem of size. And as far as I know, I'm the only one that I haven't heard anyone else make this argument. Is that most people believe that God fills the universe. Well, the universe is 93 billion light years from edge to edge, and if God is filling this, then God is 93 billion light years across. And messages within this God, even if they were flying at the speed of light, would take 93 billion years to go edge to edge. So how does God keep in touch with himself? The bigger the universe is, the more unbelievable it is that there's a God that fills it.
Yeah. I really doubt that you're going to be convincing a theist that the theistic position is unworkable on that standpoint. I'd say that within science, even if there's no transportation, physical transportation that can exceed the speed of light, there are at least conjectures now about communication across distances that might occur in some cases at
So even
speeds.
if communication were 100 times the speed of light, then it's still 1 billion years from edge to edge of the universe. It's unimaginable that there's such a being that fills the universe.
All right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, August, and unfortunately, once again, we're going to have to slide over the question of ethics. But in the time left, let's discuss the meaning and purpose of life.
Yeah.
I think that many Christians, under the influence of G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, think that atheists are all depressed all the time because their lives have no meaning and purpose, that all there is are facts, and they have nothing in truth to live for. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, atheists, see no cosmic meaning in life, but we give ourselves meaning. Now, what the religious person says is, oh, God is giving me a meaning in life. But from our point of view, what the religious person is doing is inventing a God who then turns around and gives them meaning back. So religious people are giving meaning to their own lives too. They're just using the middleman of God to do it. Atheists eliminate the middleman, and we just say we're giving ourselves meaning in life. We're finding things of interest based on our natural curiosity and desire to learn. Babies are curious. They're trying to find out about the world. Well, atheists are everyone should be curious. Hopefully it hasn't been drummed out of people. So our curiosity, and we also have a biological tendency toward socializing, being with other people, forming partnerships with other people, and that gives our life meaning too.
And I'd like to say too that I've met or heard from so many Christians who are convinced that atheists must be very depressed, very sad people. That is a statement of fact that's either true or false. Come to meet us.
Yeah.
See if in fact atheists are this depressed type of person.
See, they're
that Lewis
assuming how
and
they would
Chesterton
feel if
described.
they lost a God.
Right.
That they would feel depressed. But the things about the natural world that gave them meaning in life are still there, and that's what they have to realize. You can get rid of your God. You can miss him for a while, but there's plenty else to live for.
All right, well, thank you, August. We've reached the end of our program. I do want to mention that if you send us your postal address, we'll send you one issue of our newsletter, which has a lot of good information every month. That if you send us your email address, we'd be glad to put you on distribution for our weekly calendar of events, which is just chock full of events. We'd like to have you, if you're at all interested in this, come out to one of our events and meet some of us. And so if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.